In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can rig any creature in Blender. If you wanted to learn rigging for a while but haven't yet found that one workflow that just works, this is it. This is the one. So I did make a tutorial about this a few months back, but in that workflow I'm using multiple armature objects in the same rig. I'm placing empty objects left and right. I'm adding weird constraints. I'm basically digging myself a hole for 55 minutes straight. So since then I've learned a lot and I've got a much easier and faster workflow that I can't wait to show you. So here we are in Blender version 3.3, and we're going to start out by deleting everything and creating an armature object. And inside of this object, our entire rig is going to be placed. Bones and IK constraints and everything. So let's go to edit mode, and now you can see that we can edit this bone. So let's view this from the side, and you can select one of the end pieces here and you can hold down Control and it will snap to the grid. And a nice way to make this always snap to the grid is to enable this magnet icon. You can also press Shift Tab. So now you can move this around and it will always snap to the grid, which is going to make it a lot down Control. And it will snap to the grid. And a nice way to make this always snap to the grid is to enable this magnet icon. You can also press Shift Tab. So now you can move this around and it will always snap to the grid, which is going to make it a lot easier to place these mechanical parts after we've made the rig. Okay, so this bone is going to be our core bone. And I want to make a 6-legged insect. So let's start out by making the 2 front legs first, and then duplicate them and work our way backwards. So let's view this from the top, and to duplicate our core bone, let's go Shift D, and now let's go R and then rotate it by 90 degrees. Let's hold down Control. So let's extrude this by selecting this part and pressing E. Let's do 2 meters, and then let's do one more with 2 meters, and then actually let's do one more. I think you can press Shift R. Yeah, okay, perfect. So each leg is going to be 4 parts. I think that's good. So let's do this for the other side as well. Shift D and place it here. E, extrude, extrude, extrude.
I wanted to give this 2D art some 3D perspective. In the past, I've tried, on the other hand, Hasbro, my piece instead of continuous just not. I realized that images appear in 3D. The art is a plane and shot onto it. I set the 3D cursor to the camera and used proportional editing to scale the plane so that it has some rough geometry. Now it can be rotated and geometry. Now Now it can be rotated and even rigged to act as a quasi 3D model.
Now, these are going to be the legs, but we are also going to be using something called inverse kinematics, which basically means that we want some controller bones at the edge of these legs. So let's make one more bone, but let's just make it a short one like this, and let's do it over here as well. Okay, so let me just disable the snapping for now. What's really important about these bones is that these cannot be connected to this, because that's going to mess things up. So you want to select these IK controllers and go Alt-P, clear parent. So now this is an individual bone, and then this one, clear parent. Now what we have our core bone, we have our right leg, we have our left leg, and we have these IK controllers at the edges. Perfect. So now we can test the this rig by going to pose mode. So let's go to pose mode. You can also press Control Tab and just pull down like this. And here you can see that these bones are all connected to each other. So you could animate your legs like this. This would take a long time, like Can you imagine how long this would take? So we are going to use something called inverse kinematics, which is amazing. So select this IK controller and hold down Shift and select this bone and go Shift I, which is add IK, and then set it to active bone. So now you can select the IK controller and you can move this around and it looks good. Let's do this for the other leg as well. Select the IK controller first and then this bone and then Shift I to active bone. So now we got this IK controller here and we got it here. But there's one thing that we've forgotten to do. We have forgotten to connect these legs to the core bone. So let's go back to edit mode by pressing tab. Let's select the first bone of each leg, this, and then hold down Shift and select the core bone, Control P, and make parent keep offset. So now we got this relationship line here, which is perfect. But now when we go back to pose mode, things are going to look really weird. Now let's try and move this around. Look at that. Yeah, this is a little bit weird. So what's happening here is that both of these IK constraints are trying to control the entire rig like this. We want the IK controllers to stop here at the center. So to fix this, let's select one of the bones with the IK controller. Let's go to bone constraint properties. And here you can see that chain length is set to 0, which is basically infinity. But if you set it to wireframe shading, you can see that when we start increasing this, you can see that we're changing the chain length, and we want it to stop here. So now when we move this, it works as intended again. So let's do this for the other one as well. Okay, sweet, this is all coming together. Okay, so now let's try and give our rig an interesting pose, and I'm going to show you a really big problem with this rig. So let's place this here, and now you can take this core bone, you can move this up, and you can rotate it around, and it's looking quite powerful already. However, if you move the IK controllers, you can see that these legs move really unnaturally. It doesn't make sense. Look at that. No one walks like this. So to fix this weird behavior, we can go over to the bone properties under inverse kinematics. But if you set it to wireframe shape, let's select one of the bones with the IK controller. Let's go to bone constraint properties. And here you can see that chain length is set to 0, which is basically infinity. But if you set it to wireframe shading, you can see that when we start increasing this, you can see that we're changing the chain length, and we want it to stop here. So now when we move this, it works as intended again. So let's do this for now. You can take this core bone, you can move this up. Sense. Look at that. No one walks like this. So to fix this weird behavior, we can go over to the bone properties under inverse kinematics, and we can start locking the different axes of the bone. So for example, we want this bone to lay completely flat. However, if you move the IK controllers, you can see that these legs move really unnaturally. It doesn't make sense. Look at that. No one walks like this. So to fix this weird behavior, we can go over to the bone properties under inverse kinematics, and we can start locking the different axes of the bone. So for example, we want this bone to lay completely flat, and then we want it to go up like this. So let's just try it. Let's see x-axis. Okay, it's not that one. It's not that one. There we go. It's the z-axis. And then let's also move this a little bit over here so we can see. Yeah, we also want to clean up this little weird rotation. So now this bone is only rotating on the x-axis, like this. This bone as well is probably going to be the same axis. Yep. Yeah, okay, so that looks correct. Okay, so now let's do these other bones. But these 3 bones are going to have the same axis. So let's hold down Shift and select all of them. So now we can hold down Alt and try this on all these bones. So yeah, this looks correct. And then it's going to be the y-axis as well. Okay, good. So now all these bones have their x and y-axis locked, and they can only move on the z-axis. Look at that. This looks like a lot more natural leg movement. Yeah, now this bone essentially only moves
Welcome back to the channel, and if you're a beginner in Blender and you want to understand how bones work, this is going to be the simplest video you can possibly watch, because we're going to be just adding in some very basic bones to a cylindrical object, and I'm going to be explaining things like the basics of bone relationships, the basics of extruding, moving the bones, how we add the actual influence, so the bones can deform a piece of mesh. And we'll even set up a little animation. We'll look quickly at some of the different bone types, and just some of the absolute basics. So this is what I call like a scratching the surface kind of video. This is not going to teach you everything, this is just scratching the surface, but it'll really introduce you to the core concepts of bones in Blender if you're a beginner, and it'll really just take the complication out.
Be rotated and even rigged to
So, you have to actually be able to see what you want to paint. And you can't do that with these big, bulky default bones. Not a problem. To change that, go to pose mode, click the running man, And in viewport display, make sure to check in front. And change display from octahedral to stick. Beautiful. Now we can actually see what the hell we're doing. So the difference between doing this and custom bone shapes is that custom bones are only visible in pose mode. But when you change the default, it also applies to edit mode. Also, if you want to change the color of any of these bones, go to pose mode, click the bone, click the plus, pick your favorite color ever, assign, you're done. Now, I highly recommend that you make the controller bones on the right side a different color than the control bones on the left. Personally, I make everything on the right side. So you want to change the color of your bones? Not a problem. In pose mode, select your bone and on the right under the bone, under color, pick your favorite color, you're done. Bone under color, right under the bone, under color, pick your bone and on the right under the bone, under color. So, you have to actually be able to see what you want to paint. And you can't do that with these big bulky default bones. Not a problem. To change that, go to pose mode, click the running man, and in viewport display, make sure to check in front. And change display from octahedral to stick. Beautiful. Is that custom bones are only visible in pose mode. But when you change the pose mode, click the bone, click the plus, pick your favorite color ever, assign
Now it can be rotated and even rigged to act as a quasi 3D. Now it can be rotated and even rigged to act as and even rigged to act as a rigged to act as a quasi 3D model. Be rotated and even rigged
like this, and these bones will only move like this. So it's a lot easier to make these joint or use the joint objects in, for example, the mechanical creature kit. Okay, so now we have to do the same for the other leg. Okay, perfect. Okay, so now we want to add more legs, but before we do that, I just like to reset the position of these bones. So press A to select everything, go to Pose, Clear Transform, All. So let's go back to edit mode. Now we're going to duplicate these legs, and at this point in the tutorial, you can choose how many legs you want. I want 6 legs in total. So let's click and drag, and let's hold down Shift and click and drag. Let's go Shift D, hold down Control, and let's do 2 meters. Let's go Shift R, so it's like this. Now what we can do is you can go back to pose mode again, select all these IK controllers, and you can move them down. And then if you like, you can actually scale these down. And once you scale them in, you can press Alt S to reset the scale. So you're basically just adjusting the location. And then let's move these. Okay, perfect. So that's it. Now you got yourself a 6-legged creature with IK set up, and it's actually really easy to work with. And what's really cool about this is that if you go to object mode, you can select the rig, you can go to object data properties, and you can set it to rest position. So now you can see that all these bones are perfectly aligned with the grid. So it's really easy to just add objects. So I know it's a little bit of an unusual workflow, but for me, this has been really nice for just figuring out creatures and coming up with unique shapes. It feels a little bit backwards at first, but once you get used to making first the rig and then adding the objects, it's really nice actually. So my workflow usually consists of this. I first make the rig and then I set it to the rest position, and then I use my mechanical creature kit, which I just launched. You can check it out, link in description. So here you can